doing now?
Yeah. I can speak generally about it because it's not an issue that I'm directly involved with, but it's a sad state of affairs because the headwaters start out as blue ribbon fisheries. The water quality is world renowned. But as it passes through the Snake River Plain, there are so many dairies and cattle ranches that the manure and the fertilizer runs off into the Snake River, and over time it accumulates in the different dams along the Snake, hold it up and hold back sediment, and it all accumulates as it goes downriver. And like I said, in some stretches later on the Snake, it's so toxic that people's dogs have died just swimming there. It's a massive problem. It's sort of it's a years-long problem that we're challenge that we're taking on. It will take a very long time to do, but we're digging in. Did you have like a specific specific question about that?
Well, like how can you clean that up? Because there's no mining, so it comes from farming and effluents, like you say. So how do you clean that up? I don't know.
Yeah. So it's one of the challenges of the Clean Water Act is the Clean Water Act regulates point source discharges, and that just means essentially like you've got a pipe that's like spewing out stuff into the river, and the Clean Water Act doesn't actually regulate non-point source pollution, which is like runoff from farms. That was just, the farm lobby, ag, they influenced the Clean Water Act when it was coming out. So our leverage to use that law to regulate runoff is not great. And so it's going to take working with farmers, working with the agriculture community to encourage them to implement best practices. One of the ways we're hoping to do that is because municipalities along the Snake River are regulated as point source dischargers, they're having to pay millions of dollars to upgrade their wastewater treatment facilities. And in many cases because the water is so impaired, not necessarily because of them, but because of the agricultural community. And so they're having to do extra, in essence, because the water is so contaminated by other sources that aren't regulated. And so we're hoping that municipalities and businesses, as they have to pay more to increase the technology that's treating their wastewater, will push and encourage and put pressure on dairies and cattle ranches to do their part to offset the pollution that's going to the Snake.
I really appreciate your one-on-one treatment of the topic. I did not know anything. And I wondered if you could give a really quick how to apply for a mining, like how do you actually get to mine? Who gets to make those decisions?
Yeah.
What entity? Like what's this process look like?
Yeah. I have not applied for mine, but I know generally, or for my permit or claim, but so it depends where you go. So like if you were to go off into the National Forest, the U.S. Forest Service would be the regulator who would be issuing the permits. It might be the BLM if you're on BLM land. And they have a series of forms that you fill out, but essentially, so long as you're not in a wilderness area or an area that otherwise prohibits mining, you can go in the forest and start to prospect. And once you have located an area where you believe there are valuable minerals to be extracted, you fill out the series of forms and you apply to get your mining claim. And there's a series of steps after that to initiate exploration and actual operations, but that's like in basic form how you would get your mining claim that gives you the right to mine there and to prohibit other people from mining in that place.
And do you have to have any permitting to prospect, or could you just start rooting around in the National Forest?
Yeah.
I'm sure people do, but I mean technically.
Yeah. So there, like I was saying, you would file for your mining claim first, and then often it's the case that you would next seek permission to begin exploration activity. And depending on how the scale at which you would be exploring would trigger different requirements. So like actual larger mining companies, the bigger operations will trigger more administrative requirements and permitting requirements than just someone who's kind of going out to do it recreationally, for example.
Thank you. Matt, I have loads of questions, but you mentioned wilderness areas. Is somewhere in the back of my mind, if I remember something about mining being allowed, that mining is grandfathered into wilderness areas, is that right?
Yes, so there are, it can sometimes depend on the legislation, but generally to my knowledge, mining claims that existed before designation of a wilderness area are grandfathered in, and then it's closed after that. And then often on the back end, the Forest Service with federal government will try to buy out some of those mining claims, or some may, like if you don't keep up, like to maintain a mining claim, you have to pay an administrative fee, and to technically you have to be doing some like improvements or kind of exploring and actually doing some mining, and sometimes people don't do that, their mining claims fail. But yeah.
They expire?
Yeah.
Okay, one other question. The reform that's been passed, the mining law reform that was passed by the House Committee,
Natural Resources Committee, yeah.
what's in that reform? What are the changes that they're proposing?
So
And what's the likelihood it's going to go through?
yeah. So some of the, let's see. I know offhand that the reform proposes a royalty. So coal, oil, and gas usually pays an 8 to 12% royalty fee. So like whatever you extract, the U.S. Treasury taxpayers gets the benefit of 8 to 12%. But hard rock minerals don't have any royalty fees, so that's part of the reform. So the public getting the benefit of the resource that they're giving away essentially to mining companies. They have just lost it. Let me get back to you. It'll come back to me.
Okay.
But I think they have been trying to pass reform for a long time, and with the Senate and the House split, I think the likelihood's slim. But they've been passing bills in the House somewhat regularly, from what I can tell. So I think they're continuing. It is of an importance that they're continuing the drumbeat on it. And so when there is compromise, or when the Senate flips, it will be ready to go potentially.
So once the House passes it, it sort of stays there until the Senate is ready to accept consideration of it?
Right.
They don't have, the House doesn't have to pass it again?
Oh, I'm not sure about this, but I think in a legislative session, if it doesn't, like, they would have to repropose it in a new legislative session and pass it in the House again.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't sort of say. Okay, thanks.
You haven't said anything about patenting. That's one of you guys, is usually one of you guys' favorite thing to throw rocks at. You didn't mention it at all. You better say something about that.
Well, yeah, so what the General Mining Act of 1872 allowed is not only for people to stake a mining claim and have a right to mine on public lands, but they could file for a patent where they would actually take title to the public land and take it into private ownership. But years ago, Congress passed a moratorium on issuing those patents. So in practice today, those sort of patents aren't being issued, but that was a huge problem. The mining law was giving away public land and private ownership.
But it's still on the mining law.
It's still there, right, right.
Can you comment on the option of dredge mining and what the status is in Idaho? worse problem now than it used to be or not?
Yeah. Suction dredge mining, for those of you who may not know, is essentially a high-powered vacuum on top of like 2 pontoons. That's, I don't know, like probably my arm span. And usually 1 or 2 individuals will take that floating vacuum onto a river and with scuba gear go underwater and suction the gravel down to bedrock. And the vacuum will take it into the pontoon system where it can separate heavy minerals from lighter, so, and it's usually gold that they're looking for, and then it discharges the waste back into the river. And it's super damaging to rivers because you totally disturb the river sediment, and then the sediment that it spews back in the river is disturbed, and it is not good for fish and plant life. And technically, that's considered a point source discharge like we were talking about earlier, because it's taking a waste and discharging it out of a pipe to a water body. So they're regulated under the Clean Water Act. And there's a little bit of tension between the state of Idaho and the EPA that issues those Clean Water Act permits. So the state of Idaho will issue the water rights permit, and they have, but the EPA in many cases hasn't issued the Clean Water Act permit. And so some people in Idaho either get confused and feel like, I've got my state of Idaho suction dredge permit, I'm gonna go out there and suction dredge. But they actually need a federal permit. Or it's the case that they just totally are ignoring the federal government, they're gonna do it anyways. But it's, yeah, disturbs the riverbed, which is really bad for sensitive fish because the riverbed obviously is where fish lay their eggs, and those eggs depend on certain sediment characteristics of undisturbed riverbeds for those eggs to be successful. And